Today we're going to discuss why feminists make the best horror movies for men, 2 horror movies you've never saw, plus our Kill of the Week, coming up on CEDtalks Horror.
Oh no!
But did you know that the best, schlocky, male-centered, female objectifying horror movies are actually made by feminists? No, seriously, there's like an internal joke that goes around the internet, and you could probably find it in the comment section of YouTube shorts or maybe even TikTok videos. And all of these women seem to bring attention to their bodies. And we get like 4 or 5 guys saying, you no longer have to objectify women. They do it themselves. And this sort of thing sort of get a bunch of likes and comments, and it's pretty much the stuff of legends. But this sort of thing, I think, resonate a lot within the horror movie space. And what am I saying? There are people who take a strong stance on movies that play onto the old tropes of objectifying women and catering to the sort of teenage boy who like to see big breasts in the conventional Hollywood starlets. You know, I understand that. I completely understand that women want to be seen as more than sex objects and eye candy. Like, for real, I completely get that. Women have substance, and I enjoy movies that take that different approach with our female characters. However, I am a product of my time, a kid born in the mid-'80s, shaped by the culture of that day. Now, I'm not saying that guys have to be pigs, but there is another joke going around. Yes, another joke. And it typically happens also in the comment section when guys see overt or covert things that they love about a particular woman or women. They call themselves men of culture. And pretty much every guy understands that this means fellow like-minded guys who enjoy seeing the sight of pretty women. And we all meet up under the same umbrella, and then we thank the algorithm and then enjoy the content. Now, as a man of culture, we tend to gravitate toward movies that have a certain specific type of content. But before I get into that, there are some guys, some people who hate feminism in horror movies, like any form of feminism. And these individuals will tend to flex their proverbial muscle against anything to try to trash that movie for being too overtly feministic. And I really don't understand these people, because typically these are the same type of fellow men of culture. You know, guys who love blondes, breasts, and blood. But my answer to these men and to these people are to shut up and let these feminists cook. Let these people continue to make horror, because somewhere feminists seem to make the type of horror movies that men of culture live for. They get us. Hear me out. I don't know if this is some sort of bad messaging problem from feminists, or if we're somehow speaking the same languages on a different line, but it seems that these movies from feminists seem to have all of the ingredients that men of culture live for. Now, I can't explain it, but it seems like some really horrible reverse psychology or crazy trolling is going on. And it's like when women seem to go on these tirades and stuff, you know, like they find demeaning, then in the same instance, they just bare their breasts for all the world to see. Like, I don't quite get this, but it's actually a thing. Feminists who protest against animal cruelty, they tend to show their breasts. A couple of women wanted to protest for environmental reasons. What did they do? They walked into a store showing their breasts. Like a few months ago, a few feminists went into a church to protest the church's stance on the LGBTQ issues. They went inside the church near the pulpit, and lo and behold, they showed their breasts. Now there's like YouTube videos of compilations where feminists seem to protest against misogyny, and by doing so, they always seem to show their breasts. Now, I can recall during the Donald Trump era in office, a couple of women wanted to protest against him and his ways. So what did a bunch of women do? They went totally nude in protest. Now, I don't know if feminists get this, but you have to start doing things that people you are protesting against don't want done. I mean, trust me, there's no man of culture sitting back and saying, I wish these women would stop showing their breasts. Like, no man of culture is saying that. Now, okay, you're gonna get a few that's against you because they are like 100% against anything feministic altogether. But the smart guys, the smart guys, they're sitting back and thinking, man, this feminism stuff ain't half bad. And I said all that to say this. Feminists, for some strange reason, seem to make the type of most degrading horror movies in terms of women. American Psycho, made by a feminist. I don't really need to say a ton. I mean, Christian Bale flexing his muscle in a mirror. So are you following me here? Slumber Party Massacre, written by a feminist. Women walking around in their underwear, and several montages of breasts are littered throughout that movie. Jennifer's Body, written by two feminists. The marketing, the shtick, the hook is literally making guys fall in love with Megan Fox. That's the sauce to that movie. American Mary, created by two other feminists. There's no way you can spin that movie to make me think you didn't target teenage boys and adult men. And let's not forget, The Love Witch, created by feminists. Need I say more? I mean, I just don't know. But it seems that feminists seem to make the best guy-centered movies while their own message get lost in translation somehow. I just don't know any other way to categorize this, but that's just me. What about you? The CEDtalks Horror Podcast is officially proud to announce Rycke Foreman and dDamian Foreman as our first guests on the show. dDamian Foreman is an author of horror and urban fantasy, a published poet, and an actor of both stage and film, and a musician out in Arizona. Now, at present, he is writing a biography for a multi-award winning artist. And currently, Rycke Foreman is a novelist known for the titles GRIZZLED, Hacked Off, Portraits and Bloodlines, and many more. He prefers the horror, sci-fi, and urban fantasy genres and enjoys delving into filmmaking from time to time. And he's been a longtime fan of yours truly. So, without further ado, to do our two movies of the week. Yes, two movies. Here is Rycke Foreman and dDamian Foreman.
Hey there, I'm dDamian Foreman, author of The Circus, an American fantasy, and co-author of Portraits and Bloodlines with Rycke Foreman. Thanks to CEDtalks for inviting me on today. I'm here to highlight a movie that I think goes sorely under-acknowledged, 2008's Pontypool. You want a movie for the week? I will give you a movie for the week. To start, some background on Pontypool. This movie has a very special place in my heart. I didn't really get into horror movies until I was about 12 or 13. I'd seen plenty of them before, but I didn't seek any of them out on my own for quite a while. Now, when I had found Pontypool, I had just watched the 28 Days Later films, the Night of the Living Dead franchise, and a handful of other zombie flicks. Plus, I went nutty about a video game called Dead Rising. Zombies were, and to a degree still are, my favorite horror monsters. It was here, at the height of my teenage zombie mania, that I discovered Pontypool. I knew it would remain one of my favorite films since the moment I watched it first. It bursts with originality even 15 years after its release. Now, everybody knows how zombie infection works, right? There's been a million zombie flicks, and zombies always work the same general way, even if the details are slightly different. Zombies can be living hosts with parasites infecting them, or they can be the legitimate walking dead. They can run, or they could shamble about the cities, so on and so forth. There are many differences, but there are always quite a number of similarities. The zombie is, admittedly, a monster that is very hard to evolve. Pontypool, however, takes the idea of a zombie and flips it on its head. Yes, these are zombies in the sense that they are mindless and violent, but it is how they become zombies that makes this film shine. I would explain more, but I believe that it would spoil the film if I did. I honestly believe that nobody's going to be able to call the why and the how of this movie until it's actually revealed. The central mechanic of this film's apocalypse is the kind of out-of-the-box thinking that I simply must respect. Even if this movie otherwise sucked dog turds, I would still have massive respect for the concept alone. Stephen McHattie, the star of the film, absolutely kills it as Grant Mazzy. The rest of the cast does do well, in my opinion, but I find McHattie an absolute gem to watch. Grant Mazzy, an out-of-his-element radio host in the small town of Pontypool, is an over-the-top character whose egotistical yet charismatic presence was matched perfectly by McHattie's performance. I often like to imagine other roles played by other actors. For instance, I wonder what Carl Urban's take on Jack Torrance would be. But there are a few roles that I just can't imagine another performer in, and Stephen McHattie as Grant Mazzy is one of them. I'm not saying it can't be done, but I am saying that I'm skeptical. Beyond the major mechanic of the film's plot and McHattie's performance, I also love how many ways the film can be interpreted. I have not delved into what Tony Burgess intended with the creation of Pontypool. I generally believe in the death of the author, and that people ought to derive meaning in art independent from the creator's intentions. That said, I've found 3 ways that I like to read this film. 1. Pontypool is about news media and the way it affects that we perceive the world. 2. It is an allegory for post-traumatic stress disorder. Or 3. The film expresses what we have to say is just as important as how we have to say it to each other. I'm sure that there are more ways to be able to read this film. These are only a few of the ways that I've looked at it over the last decade and a half. Much like many of my other favorite films, I find a deeper meaning and another layer of metaphor in Pontypool every time I watch it. Pontypool was adapted from the novel Pontypool Changes Everything, the second book in the Boodley Mayhem trilogy. Loving the movie as much as I do, I was very excited to read the book. While I did quite enjoy the novel, I do believe that the movie is far superior. An odd note to add, however, the author, Tony Burgess, had a major hand in the creation of this film. Contrary to what I assumed, this did not mean that the movie itself remained anything close to the novel. In fact, they diverge quite literally in almost every way except for a few characters and the main concept that drives the virus. Pontypool is terribly underrated, and I'm very happy CEDtalks gave me this chance to come in and talk about it. Even if this film is not your cup of tea, I hope that you can find it interesting as food for thought. My name is dDamian Foreman, and I write scary stories. My horror fantasy novel, The Circus, an American Fantasy, debuted this last February. Within, a young woman finds herself trapped in an otherworldly circus where souls are currency. To survive, she must support the circus dictator, or risk it all, challenge his authority, and topple his regime. My short fiction was collected in Portraits and Bloodlines, along with many of my father's short stories. While most are horror stories, this collection dabbles in other genres such as fantasy, science fiction, and even a little bit of comedy. Portraits and Bloodlines and The Circus, an American Fantasy can be found on Amazon. If you leave a review, I'll make sure to... I don't know. Feel good about it? I don't know. I gave Cedric the links to all of these books, so please do follow the links, and, well, I'm sure you know how to buy things. Again, my thanks to CEDtalks for having me on.
Hey there, Cedland. Rycke Foreman here. Horror author and occasional independent filmmaker, although you probably haven't seen anything I've ever made. Anyway, Cedric has invited me to talk a little bit about a horror film of my choice, and I have decided to speak about Equinox. It's not a particularly well-known film. It was released in 1970. The director was a guy named Jack Woods, who didn't go on to do a whole lot of other stuff other than sound design or sound recording. Pretty sure he did work on the movie Dolls, though, which is another one of my favorites and I considered talking about. Anyway, it's 82 minutes, so that is one of its benefits. It's not the greatest film you will ever see. I will give you a caveat emptor right now. Ew, boy, the cinematography is not so good. The acting is inferior. The story's okay. Boy, the sound mixing, the editing, a lot of it's really bad, but it does have its place in film history, and that's part of why I have chosen to speak about it. Producer was Jack H. Harris, brought us the original Blob, and then just a few years after Equinox, brought us the first film by John Carpenter. He actually did Dark Star in much the same way that he did Equinox, in that it was a student film. He purchased the rights for it, filmed a little bit more around it, and then released it theatrically. The next guy we will talk about is Jim Danforth, mostly a stop-motion animator and matte painter. He worked on films like They Live, The Stuff, and Clash of the Titans. The third notable person to work on this film is David W. Allen, special effects extraordinaire. Went on to work on Caveman, Q the Winged Serpent, and Dolls, among others of my favorite. Finally, the man of the hour, the guy who actually, for the most part, directed this film, is Dennis Muren. And you would probably know him from Star Wars, Terminator 2, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. He went on to work on some of the biggest franchises through the 80s and 90s after creating this film. Won something like 8 Academy Awards, 4 special effects, plus a 9th for Lifetime Achievement. So the plot of the film itself is nothing too particular. It's a group of kids who go into the woods, find a mysterious book that is able to summon demons and other strange creatures. And, boy, that almost sounds a little familiar. It's also thought that this film was extremely influential to Sam Raimi, though from my understanding, Raimi himself has never actually talked about it. But if you watch this movie and compare it to the original Evil Dead, well, actually even the entire Evil Dead trilogy, you can definitely see a ton of influence on Sam Raimi. Not only are a lot of the components very similar, but the visual styles looks like Sam Raimi took a lot of inspiration from them. I will stop and say that if he took inspiration, but this is not a ripoff. Evil Dead's not a ripoff of this movie. They're two very different movies. You can also see a little bit of influence probably for Don Coscarelli in the Phantasm series, and perhaps even in the Blair Witch films. As mentioned a little earlier, this was an original student film that was purchased, and then a little more was filmed around it. I do have to say, I honestly like the original version better. It still has a lot of the problems, but at least the pacing keeps up and the monster mayhem is much more consistent throughout it. So, for the reasons that I like this movie, the student film is actually the preferred choice for me. And both versions are available here on the Criterion edition of Equinox. All right, well, on a final note, I would like to say thank you so much to Cedric for having us on to talk about this incredible film that I absolutely love to watch, even though it's so bad. I guess I might say some people might think it's so bad it's good. Other people will probably just think it's bad. If you're a film buff or a film historian, though, I would absolutely recommend checking this out. This film really went on to shape the next 2 decades, even though nobody knows about it. All right, now comes the fun part, because I get to plug myself. And since I'm plugging kind of a bad movie, I think I'm actually going to plug a somewhat bad novel, GRIZZLED, by myself. So, I wrote it as a love letter and a spoof of Jaws and a couple of other nature run amok films like Grizzly, Prophecy, Day of the Animals, Tremors. Also thought it'd be a lot of fun to write it very tongue-in-cheek, somewhat referential to a lot of the creature features that I absolutely love. Anyway, just want to say thanks to Cedric one more time, and wishing all of you out there in Cedland the best. Happy nightmares.
Now, Killer of the Week is from 2022's Sisu. Sisu is a movie that tells the story of this Finnish World War II soldier searching for a goal, but he mistakenly crossed paths with a gang of Nazis looking for trouble. So they rob him for his goal. But that's not the problem. You don't rob this guy. You see, he has a nasty reputation for slaying Nazis. His reputation is so well known that he's called Koshe, which means the deathless or the immortal one. I mean, no matter what predicament he's in or how much punishment you put him through, he refuses to die. So what's so special about this guy? He's basically a World War II John Wick with anger management issues. And this entire movie is a guy who doesn't even have but one line of dialogue, and the rest of the movie is him killing Nazis John Wick style. Now, At the time of this recording, we're like at John Wick 4. I think there's a 5 on the way, but we're at 4. So there's nothing you probably haven't seen from this sort of genre. Well, our kill of the week is insane because Koschei is surrounded by Nazi soldiers. And after killing a ton of them, they have their German hounds sniffing him out. And when they start to like key in on him, he pours gasoline all over himself to sort of throw off the hounds' smell. This now gives him time to make a run for it because he doesn't have any weapons, but they spot him and he has nowhere to go. He does the only thing a man with nowhere to go can do. He sets himself on fire to keep the dogs from trying to bite him. Then he jumps into the lake so the Nazi soldiers can't shoot him. I mean, this guy stays underwater to try to make the soldiers think that he's dead. So after repeated shots in the water to no avail, the Nazis start to jump into the water one by one to try and kill him. And that's when the awesomeness happens, because then there's blood in the water. Then the next guy jump in, more blood rises to the top. Then the next guy jump in, more blood rises to the top. So Sisu is grabbing Nazis, cutting their heads off, and trapping the reserve oxygen that would have traveled up to their mouth and noses, and sucking the air pockets from their necks to keep himself alive. It was at that very moment I knew I was watching something different. So, have you seen Sisu? If so, then please do yourself a favor and watch this movie. And until next time, when CEDtalks horror.
Oh no!